I've driven, surfed, wakeboarded, and water skied behind hundreds of different boats, and I've been part of thousands of different surf boat transactions over the years. And I've learned that there's one thing that almost everyone gets wrong when they are going about the process of buying a boat. And it's the one thing that may make a bigger difference than anything else that you will ever do when you're shopping for a surf boat. What's up, everyone? This is Mitch from BoardCo. Today, I'm going to be covering the number one mistake that most people make when they are shopping around for a surf boat. I'm then going to go through all of the details and a step-by-step process of how you can ensure that you do not make this one critical error when you are looking around at boats. And lastly, I'm going to help you guys understand how you can use this to get a distinct advantage over everybody else that is shopping in the marketplace, and so that you can get the very best possible deal when you are looking at a boat. The question you're probably now asking is, what is the one thing? Well, I've been in the boat business for going on 25 years now. I have dealt with surf boats, wakeboard boats, and water ski boats before that. And there's one thing that I see over and over again, and it's been consistent all throughout the years, and it's something that is normally most prevalent around first-time boat buyers, but I even see this with people that are buying their third, fourth, fifth, sixth boat. And it comes down to this one fact. Most people treat buying a boat in a similar way that they treat buying a car, where they assume that the differences between boats are very small. And it comes down to some minute details such as the trim level between the boats, instead of looking at the raw package of what they get when they're looking at any particular boat and how radically different it can be from other boats that are out there in the market. When I say that people treat a boat purchase similar to a car purchase, what I mean is that they view it similar to how they would view different cars from different manufacturers or different brands. As an example, a Ford F-150, a Ram 1500, and a GMC 1500 truck are all somewhat similar vehicles. They're all half-ton trucks. They're all going to have somewhat similar performance. Now, before you jump down my throat if you're a big Ford guy or a big Dodge guy or whatever it is, just understand that what I'm talking about this is I'm saying the differences between these trucks, though there are some, are relatively small. And your experience when you're going to own or drive these vehicles is really not going to be that radically different between them. In the car world, things have centered down to where you have different types of vehicles, i.e. trucks, SUVs, sports cars, things of that nature. And once you get within that category, the differences between different vehicles is going to be minute or something that only appears under specialized circumstances, like if you're taking the car out on a racetrack. On the other hand, when we're talking about towboats, there's a radical difference between different towboats from different brands, even when you get into similar type boats that are quote unquote comparable to one another, as in 23-foot surf boats that are in a comparable price range to one another. When in fact, the reality is the differences between these different boats is much more dramatic than it is between different cars that are of a similar category. In fact, you can take this all the way to the extent of that sometimes the differences between different boats can be as large as if you're comparing a sports car like a Porsche 911 to a Ford F-150 truck. Those are going to be two very different experiences owning and operating that vehicle, and that's probably more in line with what you can experience between different surf boats than if you're comparing different cars. So the first thing that we're going to dive into is finding the right boat for you. Now, we're going to talk about in here in a minute all the differences between boats and what areas that boats can be radically different from one another. But before we get into that, it's really important to discuss the idea of finding out what are truly the important factors for you. What I mean by this is, what are you primarily going to be doing behind the boat, or what are you going to be using a boat for? Are you going to be primarily using it as a water sport boat, i.e. wake surfing, water skiing, wakeboarding, things of that nature? Or are you going to primarily be using it for entertaining, for lounging? You can have a combination of these different things, but it's what percentage are you going to be using the boat for what activity? If you're going to be spending 90% of your time wake surfing and 10% of your time water skiing, then obviously wakeboarding isn't going to be a factor. If you're going to spend 40% of your time hanging out and lounging and you're going to be spending 50% of your time wakeboarding, you are going to be looking for a very, very different boat than the first person that I identified that's primarily surfing and water skiing. You want to identify what the activities you're going to be doing on the boat so that you can then identify what key factors are going to be the most important ones for you when you are out there shopping for a boat. Now that I've identified that piece, let's dive into the exact details of where boats can differ and why you would want to pay attention to what is important to you as you go out and look at different boats. All too often what I see is I'll see people going into a showroom or they're going into a boat show or something of that nature, and what they are really looking for gets superseded by just shopping around and looking at different niceties or different things they like about certain boats. Now, what you like and what's going to be important for you are not necessarily aligned or the same thing. Remember, when you're in a showroom or when you're at a dealership, you're not going to be experiencing the boat the way that you are going to experience the entire rest of the time that you will ever interact with or use that boat forever. You're not going to ever be sitting and staring at your boat in a showroom or in a boat show once you own it. That's a one-time experience. Where being out on the water is something that you're going to experience hundreds or thousands of times over years. And so identifying how you're going to use that boat is absolutely key. Now, once you're out on the water and using a boat, it is important to identify that there are certain key areas where there are vast differences between boats. This is going to be comparable to some different performance aspects with vehicles or cars that we don't oftentimes see as much. Things such as how well it can do 4x4 off-roading capability, or what it's like driving on a racetrack. These are uncommon scenarios for us to find ourselves in most vehicles. Most of the time we're just driving them around as daily drivers. But that is the way that you're going to operate and use your boat the vast majority of the time you're out there on the water. If you are going to be surfing, wakeboarding, water skiing, using any performance aspect of the boat, that's going to be comparable to putting a car on a test track and driving around and really pushing it to the limits. The performance aspects of a boat are something that you're going to use far more often than you will in most cars that you would ever own, unless you're going to be driving them for sports performance. Now, when we're talking about performance, what I am referring to is when we're talking about the specific activities you're going to be doing behind the boat when the boat is in motion. Wake surfing, wakeboarding, water skiing, there are radical differences between these boats. Many people assume that two different 23-foot boats that are marketed as wake surf boats are going to have relatively similar capabilities. Probably the most common phrase I hear all the time that could not possibly be more wrong is, I'm not a professional wake surfer. I don't need a professional surf wave. Or, we don't need that. We're not pros. Here's the news flash on it. If you were a pro, it wouldn't matter to you as much as it probably does right now. On the other side of it, we hear the same thing when it's applied to wakeboarding in the complete opposite context. Many people are wondering about how well a boat wakeboards when in fact they're not going to be having anybody doing anything beyond just jumping the wake and maybe trying a flip, something that most surf boats could now do with zero ballast applied. And so it really doesn't matter that much how good the wakeboard capability is on certain boats. This is why it's important to know and understand what you're talking about and how these things are going to impact what you're doing out on the water. As I mentioned before, with looking into the right boat, if you're going to be spending most of your time surfing, you're going to want a boat that's ideal for surfing. If you're going to be spending most of your time water skiing, you're not going to want a boat that is ideal for surfing. You're going to be wanting a boat that's ideal for skiing and may have the ability to do some of those other activities. It really is important to identify what percentage you're going to be doing which things to ensure that you get a boat that is going to be adequate for each of the activities that you are wanting to do. Another thing that's really important to understand is that depending on what a boat is designed for, it can have radical performance differences just based on its design elements. Meaning if you're looking for a boat that's a crossover boat that can surf and water ski, you're going to have much worse performance in those two categories than if you were to get a boat that is primarily designed for one or the other. It's just physics. Now, with that all being said, when it comes to wake sports items, this may be all stuff that you're aware of. This may be things that you are familiar with. The next parts, though, are where it can get even more nuanced and where the differences can be even larger than they are within the wake sports category. And that is in all of the other different aspects of the boats. These ones you may not be as familiar with, but they are going to be just as important to your ownership experience with a boat as are things such as its ability to surf, wakeboard, water ski, etc. A few ones I wanted to highlight and hit on are the following. Number one, the drivability of the boats. Number two, the build quality and materials that are used in the boats. Number three, their fuel economy. This is something where there's massive differences between different boats. And fourth, the functional use of the boat. In other words, what you're doing when the boat isn't in motion and you're out on the water, how people are going to be using the different aspects of the boats. Now, one, what the experience is like when you're in the driver's seat while somebody is surfing, i.e., can you see over the front of the bow? How is it when you stop the boat? Does water want to come in the back of the boat when you're surfing or wakeboarding? Does water want to come in the front of the boat when you turn around to pick up a rider? How hard is it to set up a surf wave? Can you press a couple buttons and it's good to go? Or is it something where you have to move people around all the time in order to get a proper surf wave? Is your boat going to surf properly on both sides, or does it throw a surf wave that's substantially better on one side than the other and require a lot of work from the driver in order to make sure that that isn't the case? How is the power and performance of the boat while you're driving it when you're surfing? Can you utilize all the functions and features of the boat, or are you limited on some because they require so much power and create so much drag that you are not able to fully take use of all of the different features that are available on a boat? Going beyond the surf aspects of the boat, how is the boat putting on the trailer? Are you needing to have people continually try to hold the guide poles at the back of the boat to make sure you're not off to one side too far? How is it pulling up to a dock? Can you pull up and orient your boat on a dock without a thruster system on the boat? How is it for picking up riders and orienting the boat around? Is it difficult to drive and maneuver, or does it handle seamlessly? Does the steering wheel pull hard to one side or to the other, particularly while you're surfing, but even in just other aspects when you're driving around? Next, how's the rough water ride capability? Do you ever feel like you're getting beat up or other people are getting beat up, or that you have to slow the boat down to make sure that you're not getting beat up too bad when you're going through choppy water? Oftentimes what I find is that people just assume that their experience with a boat with any one of these different aspects that is not positive is just because that's how things are. Here's the deal. It's not. That is not the way it works. If you've had a bad experience with any of those different things I have described, it's probably because the boat that you are driving is not designed properly to handle those different things. If you are wakeboarding and you pull back on the throttle and water shoots in the back of the boat and gets people wet, that's a design flaw, not a driver error. Same thing when you're turning around and picking up riders. I'm not saying you can never take water over the front of the boat, but it should not be something that every person is having to walk on eggshells around to make sure that you don't do it. If your boat is 15 years old, that's the case. If it's a 1-year-old boat, that's a design flaw. That's not a driver error. The same thing can be applied to any of these different aspects. And what I am saying is there are boats that are out there that do not have those issues. And if you are experiencing those, it's because you are looking at this massive disparity that exists between boats and just assuming that that's how all boats are, or particularly that's how all surf boats are. Like if it beats you up driving through rough water, that's just how surf boats are. But that's not the case. There are boats that have solved these issues, and many of them have solved them a long, long time ago, where there's other boat manufacturers that are running really outdated technology and really outdated designs, and they have not figured those things out. Now, why do I bring this up? Because, like I said, the differences between boats can be dramatic on these issues. There are some boats that have most, if not all of those problems, and they're considered premium top-level boats. There's other boats that have very few, if any, of those problems at all, or that have different issues of anything that I just described. And yet people will assume that all boats are on the same playing field on all of these different aspects. What compounds this issue is that most of the things I just described are things that even if you go and take a boat out on a demo before you buy it, you will not experience or will not see, primarily because a salesperson is going to specifically try to optimize that experience so that you don't end up seeing or identifying any of the flaws the boat has in how it drives, handles, or performs, or B, you're just not paying attention to those things because you're paying attention to the other aspects that most people think are important and just assume everything else is fine. So if you have an opportunity to go and drive a boat on a demo, go through and test all of the different things. Does it take water over the front? How is it handling slow speeds? How is it being put on a trailer? How is it driving while you're surfing? Does it pull hard to one side? Does the RPMs ramp way up when you try to set up a surf wave? Can you set up a surf wave easily on both sides? How easy is it for you to do and not necessarily for a salesperson to do it? These are things that really matter and are going to radically change your experience when you are out there on the water. So the next aspect I wanted to hit on is build quality. Now, when you're looking between boats, there's a really interesting way to be able to determine how good the build quality is on the boat overall. And I found that this applies to all boats across the board. And if a boat passes this test, it means it's really built with higher quality materials, higher craftsmanship. And if a boat doesn't, then it really wasn't. And it might be a really nice trimmed boat. It might look really nice, but it's not built to the same quality level. So the best way to identify this is to go and just pick up a bow fill cushion. Or if there's another free cushion anywhere in the boat, just pick up a cushion that's there in the boat and check and see everything from how good the stitching is to how heavy it is to how durable it is. Just push on it and touch and feel it. And if it's too squishy, if it's just seems flimsy, that's a pretty good indicator that that's how all of the upholstery is done on the boat and really how the boat is finished and done overall from a construction standpoint. There's a lot of elements to build quality, and it can come down to vinyl, to foam, to fiberglass, to all of the other different components, and if they're machined and billet or if they're plastic or how they're built and constructed and put together. There's some manufacturers do a really, really good job at finishing a boat and making it look really nice without necessarily having it backed up with higher quality materials. And that is going to really impact your experience out on the boat. It's going to impact how well the boat holds up over time, but it's also going to impact the way the boat functions and feels while you're out driving on it. If it's not built to the same level, you're going to hear a lot of things on the boat, whether that's the boat slapping against the water, or you're going to feel more rough water ride because the boat is going to flex and move more. You're going to have cushions that bottom out when you're out there on warmer days. There's just the vinyl may sag or droop over time. There's a lot of different aspects that come into build quality that is going to impact your experience on a boat over a period of time, or even just in a very short period of time, depending on the conditions that you're using the boat. Next thing to hit on, fuel economy. So this one is a kind of contentious subject. It's been hit on over and over and over again. We've actually done a bunch of tests. If you've seen videos that we've done that showcase fuel economy comparisons between different boats, the big factor is this. There are massive differences, and it primarily comes down to one thing, and that is the RPM range that a boat is running in while it is surfing. That's the factor. There's some boats that claim to be really fuel efficient that aren't, or they're measuring with different dynamics, like with a boat at full running speed with no ballast and no crew. But what we were talking about, there is a massive discrepancy, is how much fuel these boats burn while they're surfing, and it just comes down to how a boat is engineered. Is it designed and engineered to be a surf boat, or is it not? Is it designed for wakeboarding or water skiing or some other activity? That is going to be the difference that you end up experiencing here. The general rule of thumb is the higher the RPM range, with, I have to add one caveat of throwing a good sized surf wave, because if you're throwing a surf wave that's about yay big, it's about 6 inches tall, you're going to not have the same kind of RPM burn as if you're throwing a wave that's 3.5 or 4 feet tall. So throwing a good, powerful, respectable surf wave, how many RPMs is the boat running at versus not? That is going to be your factor on how much fuel burn is there. And there are some boats that will run at 3,000 RPMs while you're surfing. There's other boats that will run at 42 or 4,500 RPMs while you're surfing. That experience is going to be radically different. It's going to be way louder. It's going to burn way more gas. It's going to put way more strain on your motor. There are very large differences, and you can see a full swing of anywhere from 3,000 to 4,500, so a 50% increase in RPMs, essentially doing the same activity, doing the same thing. And that just comes down to how the boat is engineered and designed. The last of these items to hit on is the functional use of the boat. In other words, how functional and usable is a boat? Is it a boat that is designed to look pretty in a showroom or in a boat show, or is it a boat that is designed to be used and utilized when you're out on the water? There are a lot of boats that are out there that are designed to look nice and finish nice and even showcase things such as storage compartments or features that exist on the boats. Things that are not necessarily as functional and usable once you actually get out and start utilizing the boat but that show really nice when you're in a boat show or a showroom. Rather than necessarily looking at storage compartments or even how big the storage compartments are, maybe talk to the person that's showing you the boats and ask them where they put things in the storage compartments. When they're talking about different features, ask them about how they use those different features when they are out on the water. And you will very quickly come to understand whether there's something that's just fluff that you'll never actually use or isn't designed for how you use the boat, or if it's something that will be extremely useful and beneficial for you while you're out on the water. We see all the time on all kinds of different boats that they have different features or elements that aren't actually useful and that nobody actually uses when they're out on the lake, but that might be features that sway them one way or another when they're looking at purchasing a boat. Figure out how you are going to actually use these different things and if they are indeed something that is valuable for you to have on the boats or if it's not. All right, the last thing I want to talk about here is talking about getting a deal and using the things that I have just discussed to make sure that you're getting the best possible deal on a boat. And it comes down to really one key item or one key issue. If you understand that all boats are not the same, that the performance is different, the features are different, all of the elements on the boats are different and can produce radically different outcomes. That means you also should not apply the same methodology of thinking that everything's the same when it comes down to the price tags on the boat. Now, this can apply to a lot of different things. This can apply to discounts. This can apply to rebates. This can apply to discounts off of MSRP numbers, which I've covered before in different videos and discussed how it's really just a fictional made-up number in the first place. But what it comes down to is this. Finding the right boat that's going to fit you is going to be a much more important element in ensuring you get a good deal on that boat than seeing the exact percentage or dollar discount off MSRP or what incentives, or if you're getting a holdover model that you can get a screaming deal on, or any of those things. Getting a screaming deal on a boat that is not an ideal boat for you is not getting a screaming deal. It's getting bamboozled by some sales pitch to get you to buy a boat that's not actually ideal for you, that isn't something that you want or need. That is the most important thing when you are looking at how you can get the best possible deal on the boat. If you do that and apply it to not just the boat itself, but all the elements within a boat, you will find that you don't end up paying for things you don't care about. You only pay for the things that you really do care about, and you won't have a boat that's missing some of those key critical items that will be important for you just because you are searching for a better deal. Once you've addressed and taken care of those key elements, then it just comes down to figuring out the details and what is the ideal time or the ideal situation for you. We actually made a separate video about this that you can go and watch that talks about getting a deal on a boat, when the ideal time is to buy a boat, and how that can vary from person to person just depending on what you are trying to do for you. If you pay attention to all of the elements that I cover in that video, as well as the things I've discussed here, getting a bad deal on a boat isn't even something that you got to worry about. You're going to have a fantastic boat and miss out on the #1 deal killer of all, which is getting the wrong boat in the first place and discovering that you need to change it out or trade up or do something different in the future. We see this happen over and over and over again with people that are looking to try and get the best deal and end up being very unhappy with their purchase because they're not paying attention to the things that we covered here in this video. So, in summary, the #1 takeaway that I have had with over 25 years of experience dealing with boating, with selling, buying, and owning dozens of boats and dealing with thousands of boat sales, it comes down to one thing. Not all boats are the same. In fact, the differences between them are far more drastic than you probably even expect or imagine. In fact, one of the most surprising things is whenever I get on different new boats from different manufacturers and experience different things, I am shocked at how big the differences are, sometimes even within different models from the same manufacturer. It is not a minor difference or minor details. It can be absolutely dramatic and would entirely sway all of my decisions or my opinions about those different brands or those different models entirely based on the experiences I have, which sometimes are considerably better or considerably worse than I ever imagined. If this has been helpful, check out some of the other video content that we have and check out boardco.com for more information. Thanks a lot.